waste on me that you're on time, so I appreciate it. But for those who are not, we will give them some grace and offer them 2 more minutes to get here, and then we will begin our governance session. Thank you so much, and we'll start momentarily. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started for our afternoon session. Thank you so much for coming back. We are excited to get you awake. There's some time for a siesta after our session, but we just ask that you keep awake for us and ask amazing questions to our presenters here. And so first up, we have Dr. Krista Sherman, who will talk to us about stakeholder perspectives on the status and conservation of critically endangered Nassau grouper in the Bahamas. Dr. Sherman, over to you.
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for being here right after lunch. Hopefully you're not too sweaty. But I'm Krista. I lead the Fisheries Research and Conservation Program for the Perry Institute for Marine Science. And this afternoon I'm going to be presenting some of the work that I did in collaboration with Lester Gittins of the Department of Marine Resources to better understand stakeholder perspectives on the status and management of critically endangered Nassau grouper in the Bahamas. We're at a fisheries conference, and I think most of you here know that fisheries are incredibly important and provide tons of ecosystem services and benefits. And I think what's most interesting, and what we heard a lot about in this morning's session, is how integral it is to the cultural identity and cultural heritage. But fisheries are increasingly under threat. There are lots of data gaps that we're aware of. And in countries like the Bahamas that are really huge, we also have challenges with governance and also with challenges with enforcement. And so it really does require us to have an interdisciplinary approach to research and really engage with stakeholders if we're going to actually have effective fisheries policy and governance. And I think this is particularly important for critically endangered species. And a classic example of this is the Nassau grouper. It's highly susceptible to being overexploited because of its life history characteristics. But in the Bahamas, this is still a really highly valued commercial fishery. It generates, on average, $1.2 million a year in revenue. But we're seeing declines in wild populations, and over the last 28 years, there's been a 97% decline in commercial landings as well. So clearly there's a need for us to do something different if we want a viable fishery long-term and if we want to help populations to recover. So for us, we wanted to assess stakeholder perspectives regarding the status of this species, what their understanding was, and their perspectives on how it's being managed, but more importantly, to gauge their willingness to support potential changes to management strategies for this species. So between 2016 and 2019, we conducted a number of different stakeholder assessments, starting with a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis with invited workshop participants. And they identified about 10 strengths, 18 weaknesses, 17 opportunities, and 11 threats to the Nassau grouper fishery. And these were all focused around these 4 common themes. So environmental change, fisheries management, legislation and enforcement, as well as science education and outreach. So using that, I designed 2 semi-structured questionnaires that were sent to 55 enforcement stakeholders, so those that are legally tasked with managing the fishery, as well as 37 conservation stakeholders. So these are people that work in NGOs, environmental educators, people that are scientists as well. Subsequent to this, the Department of Marine Resources conducted nationwide assessments, and these consisted of both electronic questionnaires, and they conducted in-person interviews, 299 in-person interviews throughout the Bahamas, which is an archipelago, so several different islands. So response rates from the conservation and enforcement stakeholders, so the first set of questionnaires that we did, was about 41% and 20% respectively. So most of our respondents were actually male in the enforcement group, and females contributed more to conservation responses. And in addition to that, our stakeholders varied in age. Most of the respondents were between 26 to 45 years of age. And there was a range of educational experience, most at the bachelor's level. With regards to the status of Nassau grouper in habitats, the majority of both stakeholder groups indicated that fish are in decline. So reefs here are in blue, nursery habitats in green, but importantly, some enforcement stakeholders reported they believed and perceived that fish were increasing. And the same pattern was true of commercial landings as well, which is the orange on the left. And the stakeholders were acquiring this information from a range of sources, but most, I think, interesting as well was their personal observations. In terms of prioritized threats to the species, there were 4 common threats among both stakeholder groups, but these differed in order of importance. So the conservation stakeholders perceived habitat degradation or destruction along with FSA fishing, so fishing the spawning aggregations, to be the biggest threats to the species, while enforcement stakeholders believed illegal fishing and overfishing were the biggest threats to Nassau grouper. In terms of understanding of current fisheries management, I think this was interesting. There was 80% accuracy provided across both groups, but both groups provided incorrect responses, and these are people legally mandated to enforce fishery regulations and share information with the public. So the actual closed season for Nassau grouper in the Bahamas is December 1st through February 28th, not December 1st through January 31st. And the current minimum size limit is 3 pounds and not 5 pounds. Stakeholders also displayed varying responses regarding the effectiveness of the different methods that are used to manage Nassau grouper in the Bahamas, as well as the impacts these are having on commercial fishers. In terms of whether or not science should be used to inform fisheries management, conservation stakeholders were largely in agreement with this. A lot of the enforcement stakeholders were as well, but some of them were neutral or strongly disagreed with this statement. In terms of moving forward, though, how would they like to receive information about fisheries, about conservation issues? Conservation stakeholders preferred peer-reviewed sources of information, and unsurprisingly, enforcement stakeholders preferred things like presentations and social media to get their information. Enforcement stakeholders identified a number of challenges and difficulties they face with doing their work, and these are just 5 of them, with the top 2 being lack of resources and funding, and a lack of training or trained staff. And in terms of the effectiveness of these different methods, from water-based patrols to aerial patrols and landing inspections at both point of sale and at the consumer level, they had contradictory responses regarding the effectiveness of these methods. And in terms of the existing training programs, most enforcement officers on the right top right there, felt that they were inadequate. And moving forward, they wanted to see more training manuals, workshop presentations, and videos to help them with their work. So we saw some examples of good literacy and practices engaging fishers that Martha talked about this morning. So stakeholders did support changes to fishery regulations, including amendments to the existing regulations that we have, so in things like increasing the minimum size limit, extending the closed season, and marine protected areas, including no-take marine protected areas. But there was also support for the establishment of new regulations. Interestingly, though, there was minimal support by both the conservation and enforcement stakeholders for a temporary ban, which has been effective in the Cayman Islands at helping populations recover. So moving forward to the nationwide surveys, DMR received 29 responses to the questionnaires that they distributed electronically, and fishers comprised most of the individuals that were interviewed. And this was done across 12 different islands. We haven't done an integrated analysis of these different measures yet. So this is just combined, and we haven't looked at this breakdown by stakeholders. But overall, there's support for changes to regulations, with the most support for the introduction of new regulations, including prohibiting foreign recreational fishers from harvesting Nassau grouper and the use of traps at spawning aggregations. So the future sustainability of Nassau grouper is a major concern for stakeholders in the Bahamas, and that's reflected in some of the additional feedback and quotes that they provided. And while their views regarding the status of this species were variable, in some instances differ from the available scientific information, the perceived threats were common among both stakeholder groups, along with the recognized need for us to improve existing management, as well as develop targeted education and outreach materials to address some of the misconceptions regarding current management measures and the status of the species. Improvements to Nassau grouper are being put forward, and I would like to thank the working group for continuing to advocate for policy changes and their stakeholder support for some of the policy changes that we talked about today, along with 11 recovery actions that have been outlined in the management plan. So just to wrap up, overall, stakeholders demonstrated support for science-based changes to current Bahamian fishery regulations and proposed new regulations, along with recognizing the need to better enforce and manage the fishery. National regulations in the country for fisheries are currently under revision, and hopefully at some point those will be helpful in facilitating improvements and recovery of the fishery. And with that, I'd like to thank Lester Gittins and the staff for the Department of Marine Resources for contributing to this work. And if there is time, Eric, I'll take one question maybe. Thank you.
Perfect. Oh, Krista, you have the room on fire.
Hot.
First question.
Great, I didn't put anybody to sleep.
Oh, all the hands.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Emma, let's start with you for a quick question. And Alejandra, we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you, Krista. Great presentation and good research. My name is Emma Doyle. I coordinate MPA Connect, the network, GCFI and NOAA. Thinking about enforcement brings us to thinking about zoning and boundaries and MPAs and enforcement effectiveness. And you've got quite a good base size of interviews. I wondered, have you split or could you split the data out by MPA, or perhaps consider those areas with what we might consider effective enforcement presence or not?
Yes, I mean, that's sort of the next step with some of the work that we've been doing. I will say, for those of you that attended GCFI last year, we know that even with MPAs and those that are more enforced, like the Exuma Keys Island and Sea Park, we're still seeing impacts to wild populations, but it's definitely something that we like to look into more. Hi, Alejandro. Hola. Thanks.
Yeah, was climate change considered in any of the questionnaires or any of the intersections that you were trying to identify?
Yes, so I only presented a small subsection of some of the things that we talked about. Some of the other components of this work looked at potential drivers as well, and so when we publish a paper, we'll kind of delve into some of that a little bit more.
Awesome. Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Krista. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and so just before John comes up, quick announcement. Martin Russell has lost his bag with his diary in it. It may or may not contain confidential Australian information. He is giving a reward, so I don't know if he's giving a reward, but if you see his bag with his diary, his name is in it. So please return it to Martin or to the staff or to someone, and we'll get it to Martin. Thank you very much. Okay, up next, John will talk to us about alternative sustainable livelihoods for small-scale fisher folk. Thank you, John.
Thank you. So my name is John Clayton, and I represent Fisherfolk First, which is a non-profit organization based in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And it was founded to empower small-scale fishing communities and to help them develop prosperous, sustainable livelihoods. Over the last 30 years, the Turks and Caicos Islands has undergone some pretty impressive economic growth and development. And in an effort to help local entrepreneurs to benefit from this, the government launched a pretty amazing grant scheme called the Micro, Small, Medium Enterprise Program. And under this program, any Turks and Caicos Islander is eligible to apply for and get a cash grant and other benefits to start a micro, small, or medium business. Over recent years, fisheries have become a priority area of this scheme. And so any business engaged in fishing or fish processing is eligible to a grant of up to $50,000. In addition, the scheme is trying to attract more fishers to apply. And this is somewhat in response to the livelihood challenges faced by typical fishers. So in the Turks and Caicos Islands, most fishers are freedivers. Spiny lobster is the most valuable fishery, but they also catch queen conch and reef fishes. The profits from a day's fishing are shared equally amongst all the fishers on a vessel, with one share also going to the owner of the boat. And when the lobster season starts on the 1st of August, fishers can make a lot of money. So this is the highest landings by one boat in 2023. So they got 1,600 pounds of lobster that had an ex-vessel price of over $5,000. So both the fishers in orange got over $1,000 each, and the fisher in blue got over $2,000. And while that might seem very high, that quickly declines. And although fishers can turn to queen conch and fishes, many will drop out of the fishery before the end of the lobster season, and they'll find work elsewhere. A lot will go into construction, a lot will be underemployed during that time, and many of them will go into debt. So having an alternative enterprise they can turn to would be very helpful, either during that period of the season when landings are low, or on an ad hoc basis, or transitioning permanently. And this could also be a business within fisheries where there are better returns throughout the year. And this could include focusing on underexploited or currently underexploited species like deepwater snappers and pelagics, or focusing on value-added markets. So the grant scheme is seen as a very good way to help fishers develop these new businesses and get them better livelihood security. It's also believed that this scheme could be used by encouraging fishers to have other businesses. It will reduce the pressure on the heavily exploited spiny lobster and queen conch fisheries. So one of the questions we wanted to ask is that really the case? Is that a viable approach to achieving sustainable fisheries? And to answer this, we need to take a little step back. So fisheries management seeks to constrain, or the animation does work, seeks to constrain how fisheries operate within a boundary of acceptable activities. And it does this through input controls such as limits to the number of fishers and the number of boats, restrictions on certain gears, areas closed to fishing, and closed seasons. Through output controls such as quotas, bag limits, species bans, and size limits, and through other controls through enforcement such as fines or other legal actions, and through incentives such as subsidies and grants, and disincentives such as having to pay for a license. A good system of management ensures that every possible combination of fishing activity within this bubble is sustainable. Often that's not the case, and there are gaps, and so it's possible for unsustainable fisheries to develop. In the case of the Turks and Caicos Islands, there are some pretty big gaps. There's no mechanism to control the number of fishers, and there's no mechanism to control the number of vessels. In addition, there are no real quotas in the country. There's a limit to the amount of conch that can be exported each year, but there's no limit to the amount that can be caught locally and consumed locally. So in this context, what happens when you start to incentivize fishers? The assumption is, by taking fishers out of the fishery, overall landings will decline and could become sustainable. But if we actually look at the freediving fishery of the Turks and Caicos and also look at catch per unit effort, what's more likely to happen is that when you take fishers out of the fishery, catch per unit effort is going to go up, but total landings isn't actually going to go down. And that's great for the fishers remaining in the fishery, but unless you take a lot of fishers out of the fishery, total landings aren't really going to decline. And if we look at this in a slightly different way, with fewer fishers, the livelihood curve of each fisher gets bumped up. Landings stay better for longer, and fewer fishers drop out of the fishery because it still makes economic sense to fish. And so total landings pretty much remain the same. Another assumption is that if you encourage fishers to develop businesses in tourism or a different type of fishery, that they'll take their boats with them. And that doesn't really make economic sense either, because the boat is an asset that could still be making money for them. So instead of being an active fisher, they're now a business owner with other people fishing from his or her boat. And another consideration is that although the Department of Fisheries would like fishers to transition to what they consider the underexploited fisheries of deep water snappers and pelagics or transition to tourism, the grant scheme itself can be used to buy vessels, engines, and gear for the freediving fishery. And you don't need any history as a fisher to do this. You just draft a convincing business plan, submit it, and you can get funding, $50,000, to start your fishing business and grow your fleet. So instead of being a means to reduce fishing pressure on spiny lobster, queen conch, and reef fishes, this grant program could actually increase it, in which case it starts to become a harmful fishing subsidy. So steps need to be taken to prevent overcapacity developing in any fishery, to prevent the livelihoods of existing fishers from being jeopardized, and to focus on what are the underexploited fisheries, or by adding value, such as going for quality in the freediving fisheries rather than quantity, which is currently what they focus on. So the next question we wanted to ask was, can fishers actually access the tourism market? Can they launch viable businesses in tourism? And undoubtedly, fishers have skills, knowledge, and interest that transfers to the tourism industry, and that could be through boat tours, snorkeling trips, through recreational fishing. And some fishers have already made this transition. So this guy takes tourists out. He charges them over $1,000 a day on his boat. And when he doesn't have, everything's very expensive in the Turks and Caicos, when he doesn't have fishers, when he doesn't have tourists, he goes back out to commercial fishing. But most commercial fishers don't have vessels that tourists would be happy to go out on. And this is particularly the case if they've been catching conch, which can get pretty smelly very quickly. And for tourism, fishers would be eligible to a grant of $10,000, and that's not going to get them a replacement vessel. It might get them some renovation, but this is what the existing competition looks like. On top of that, hotels are not going to encourage their guests to go out with the smaller independent operators when they can't guarantee safety, quality of the experience. And the typical tourist in the Turks and Caicos is paying, on average, more than $600 a night to be there. So they're looking for luxury rather than budget experiences. So what are the solutions? So if the government wants fishers to transition into tourism, it needs to be more focused. Fishers need to be encouraged to exploit niches in the market that don't require luxury and expensive vessels. And this can be helped by developing classes of activities that are restricted to commercial fishers only. And the fisher in this picture, he is on an island that doesn't have a lot of competition. It's a small island, and this is a viable option for some of the other smaller, less populated islands. And that could be protected through licenses, so preventing some of the bigger players from being able to operate there so the local, smaller independent ones can survive. Another option that doesn't require luxury to be competitive is taking tourists out to fly fish for bonefish. The key to success for this is being a good guide that can reliably find fish. Tourists will be happy if the boat is clean and safe and they get to catch fish. And there are options that have much cheaper startup costs by going out on kayak or paddleboard or just wading from shore. And the government is particularly keen to follow the example of the Bahamas. So they're pushing strongly for fishers to follow that lucrative example where the bone fishing industry in the Bahamas is much more well developed. So to end on a positive note, there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. It's great that the government is promoting sustainable and, importantly, prosperous livelihoods for fishers. It's great that there's money that they're putting behind it to help fishers pursue these opportunities. There's a lot more work to be done, but it's definitely steps in the right direction. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, John. Any questions for John? Okay, we have a hand up.
Hello, great presentation. I just have a question regarding, I guess, thoughts on mitigating like overuse of an area. So for example, I know like at the Mangrove Key area, there's a lot of like ecotourism, and to the point where, you know, I've seen people basically dragging their kayaks through seagrass and all these things. And that's just with the organizations that are already utilizing it, right? So do you think that these kind of switching to the ecotourism lifestyle should really be focused on like, you know, like North-South Caicos, stuff like that, so that to minimize the overuse? Because I feel like there's already an issue in terms of enforcement and things like that of making sure that the resources are being exploited effectively.
Well, I think there is a certain prioritization of some of the smaller islands with this scheme. So Providenciales and perhaps Grand Turk aren't being prioritized, but the smaller family islands are. But there's also, they're introducing a licensing program through, I think it's called the Tourism Regulation Licensing Ordinance, so that you can't just go out and do it. You need to actually be get a license and go through some program of training before you can do it, which theoretically means you're not going to go and do bad things, but that doesn't stop the kind of too many people doing the same thing, which will ultimately damage it. And that's definitely a potential issue for the Providenciales with all those tourists there. So I don't know how that would particularly change, but yeah, it's something that hopefully is addressed through that new scheme.
Okay, I see two hands. Will it be quick questions? Okay, Nancy. Marta was unsure, so Nancy. Oh, can we get a mic to Nancy, please?
I'll talk loud. Sorry, madam. Take the microphone. Thank you. This is the new sector then for removals. Possibly, this isn't just catch and release, except for the part where you're actually maybe just floating around and looking at fish, or if you're doing some of the flats fish, and that could be catch and release. But have you included any kind of ideas toward data collection?
Idea for promoting fishers to
Right. Yeah.
to do other fisheries.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's definitely that's something that there's actually currently $1 million being considered to be issued out to fishers to go into different fisheries. And I think that's deep water snapper, possibly pelagics, and also processing fish.
Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John. We appreciate it. Okay, up next, Nancy Cummins will talk to us about pilot testing, integrated implementation of Western Central Atlantic Fisheries Commission endorsed instruments. Nancy.
Thank you. Again, Nancy Cummins. Oh, yeah, make it. Or I can look at. Okay, is that good? Is that it? Okay. Hi, again, Nancy Cummins, and I'm here representing a group of folks. Some of them are from FAL, some of them Mark Tacony, Yanni Laurent, Cecilia Gascar, Ariana Gentili, and Bracken Van Nerik, as well as myself, is not on the slide here. And then we have Miles Phillips also from the Spawning Aggregation Working Group. Let me see if I can make this work. So the name of the presentation is Pilot Testing of Integrated Implementation of WCFC Endorsed Instruments. Could this multi-pronged approach spur the shift towards enhanced enforcement of conservation and management of aquatic resources by members? Apologies for that spelling. So the content, quickly I'll go over the WCFC mandate and focus. Some of the challenges that we perceive in the adoption, implementation of WCFC instruments, and the instrument here means a management measure, a conservation measure. A fairly new approach to mitigate these obstacles, and I'll go over a first pilot project that was implemented starting in I think it was in January, February 2023. We've just finished the project, so we have some initial results, and it involved collaborations between two WeCFC working groups. A working group is a scientific group formed of members from either a topical working group such as IUU or recreational fisheries and or species working group. And these two groups worked together. It was a spawning aggregation working group and the fishery data and statistics working group. We worked together towards developing an approach where we might actually reduce some of the obstacles regarding implementation and adoption of a conservation measure by member countries. And then we're going to talk about the lessons learned to date, and then we're going to talk about a new pilot that we're starting to get involved in. Quickly, the mandate of WeCFC. WeCFC is a commission in the area, FAO Area 31, and it's formed of an executive committee, has a secretariat, a scientific advisory group, which is called the SAG, and also, as I mentioned, working groups. The working groups can be topical, i.e. a certain specific topic of interest from the commission members, also in other projects, and capacity building initiatives. The purpose and objectives of WeCFC are to promote the effective conservation and management and development of the living marine resources in the Area 31. To address common problems of fisheries by the management countries, there are 34 members in WeCFC. WeCFC does not have binding authority in terms of management within the competence area. It has advisory functions, meaning it can promote and develop conservation management measures and make recommendations and resolutions. Okay. So this collaborative approach towards enhancing the adoption, basically, a commission, whether it's a binding commission such as ICAT or WeCFC, we do a lot of projects and we recommend numerous management measures. Now, how do these get implemented? How do they get adopted? In the case of WeCFC, you got 34 members, so that's a lot of countries to come together to reach basically consensus, if you will. And a good example would be the CITES listing of CONC and the work behind CONC, or the Spawning Aggregation Working Group. You have so many countries that are involved in this, so how do you get consensus among these countries? So a novel approach was developed we started developing the project back in probably the fall of 2023 rather, and then actually started the project and received funding from the European Directorate General, DG MAR, and that was to blend these two working groups, the Spawning Aggregation Working Group and the Fishery Data and Statistics Working Group, and to build on the collaborative work across these working groups. And I just want to point out again here that I don't think this will work here, but it works here. Yeah, so it was stimulated in part by this resolution between CRFM on the collaboration with the WeCFC working groups. And basically, through the collaborative work across multiple working groups, the aim was to enhance development of management measures, but also to reach consensus and to promote the effectiveness of these management measures in maybe a little bit faster, more expedient way. The general challenges to mainstreaming the FSA, meaning the Fishery Spawning Aggregation Species Management, it was discussed at the 6th meeting, which was June 2024. There's about 8 or 9 of these, and that was the need to harmonize regional seasonal closures. There's a lack of enforcement of the management measures across the entire region, to quantify and reduce IUU fishing, improve availability of information and data for stock assessment evaluations. It's well known that the status of the FSA species is either needs updating or is unknown in many countries. There's a continued need and recognition of the lack of biological data for assessment. And as we know, and all of you know that have been involved in resource fisheries management and biological studies for your whole career, there's just a basic lack of information on biological data. You don't have enough capacity with staffing. You don't have funds to hire new staff. We have staff that leave. So sometimes we have the lack of loss of institutional knowledge. We kind of cavalierly say that, but it's really, really true. And we have, in the case of FSA species, there's an insufficient lack of education and public awareness of just why you need to conserve these species. Everybody says, oh, I want my children to have more fish. I want my grandkids to see these beautiful spawning fish. But there's just, in some of the cases, the islands are small. Maybe it's easier to get out there, get to the schools and educate them to come up with programs and funding for that. But in some islands, they're larger. So it's a scaling problem also. And then there's, in the case of FSA species, there's a real lack of information from the OSPESCA countries, the Central American countries. So there were some specific challenges also. In order to adopt, I think the spawning aggregation management plan, there are 16 different measures. And I could have listed them here, but you don't want to read all that. But basically, they get down to these 6 items. Lacking time series, so you don't know stock status, you don't know the status of the FSAs, in other words, where they're spawning and when they're spawning. You don't know that in all the countries. You know it in some countries. And we have some, sentinel information on some areas that have been well studied, such as Belize. Excuse me. But we do have some recently improved tools, use of remote tag video, and also the tagging information. But we need to learn to apply those tools in some regions. So in some countries, they don't have the capacity or the staffing, or they don't have the funding to go out and hire people to bring into the country to show them how to use those tools. They're very good tools, and I think we can make better use of that. We can also, for example, use of AI in some countries. I think that is one tool that needs to be really ramped up. Also, again, to promote the social acceptability of why we need to protect these species in these areas. Why do we not want you to go there? And then the lack of enforcement. That's something it's not just for FSAs, it's for all reef fisheries throughout the world. Sorry. Okay, so I borrowed, I talked back on this slide here, the lack of specific information. And I wanted to show you what a good example would be. And I borrowed one from a stock assessment that I was involved in a number of years ago. CEDAR, the Southeast Data Assessment and Review process, carries out stock assessments for the US Caribbean. And here are the data items that are typically needed in a stock assessment. You need to know catch, landings. In other words, like I was asking the question to Clayton about extraction, removals, mortality. You need a historical time series, usually equal to 1 lifespan of catch time series. The landings, you need to know, you would like to have some measure of relative abundance. And we typically call that catch per unit of effort. And there's all kinds of ways to calculate it, but we really need it to be reflective of the population. You need to know in your scientific heart that you truly feel it is reflective, representative of the population. And you also need biological inputs, and that's important in order to run a stock assessment model. And then finally, you need to know what are the management measures in place. So what we have over here on the right, these are depictions of the catches, the life history, the management measures down here. And so I think these are the size, frequency, and the selectivity on top of it. I think this laser could be a little darker, just to tell the group here, even for my eyes. So in a nutshell, we progressed the adoption. What is the goal of this little project? It was to move along adopting WCAFC management measures. Adopting them, that means that you've accepted them as a country, and you also want to implement them. So I've already gone through the aim. We need the statistics, the tools. We need tools that can be accepted and used across all the countries as well. Maybe have something a little different. It can be, applied to your country's situation, but you need the tools so you can develop statistics that are needed for evaluation, such as catches and landings. And then finally, you need to identify a practical approach to getting into the field and getting this done. And then, so if this project then was aimed at progressing the adoption of these management measures for the entire region. So we would like to know what can we get from this project that can be applied at the regional and to the national level, so that you can have harmonized outputs within the countries and across to the region. And then can you move that to other projects? I mean, it's fine and good if a commission, ICAT, WCAFC, IOTC, if you're developing all these regulations and measures, but you got to get going and you got to get it done and you got to have performance. So very quickly, the specific benefits were that we collected information to 3 pilot countries, Belize, Bahamas, and Cuba, and we were able to grab some of this data. We developed standardized tools. We actually informed what we call the Data Collection Reference Framework, Appendix 6, on growth, maturity, et cetera. We're now considering developing a set of status indicators. It could be spawning site size. And so the conclusion is that it works. It's a good use of using research dollars. There was, like I said, there's an extensive number of instruments, but can we move those forward? Can we judge the performance? It showcased a practical way of implementation of these measures. And then finally, at the end, the working group feels like we can progress this pilot to another pilot. And that pilot in specific is linking the Spawning Aggregation Working Group Fishery Data and Statistic pilot to the newest perceived pilot, and that will be the Spiny Lobster IUU Fishery Data and Statistics pilot. We would like to take some of the lessons we learned from the Spawning Aggregation pilot and implement those to the Caribbean Spiny Lobster. And from a practical standpoint, from the review that has been done, we really know that we need a lot of these same data streams, biology, inventories of size, spawning lobster size, and develop those further. Okay, so the lessons that we learned were that the regional data needs are the same as we know from classical statistics. You've got to have a time series of landings, the temporal components are needed. What is more of a guideline to share with countries for better consistency at national level? They want to know what their abundance is. Oops. Okay, so the next steps, identify other WCAFC instruments that you, within the audience here, may know and may be interested in for possible collaborations on progression, adoption, and implementation. Identify suitable species and other topics that are worth collaborating with. And we're considering dolphinfish and the anchored fads fishery and recreational fisheries. Identify this cross-cutting approach to progress the data collection reference framework, because that particularly comes in progressing and enriching the material that's available at the WCAFC regional level. And thank you. I think I might have gone
Perfect.
over. Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nancy, we have a quick question, if it's less than 30 seconds.
Thank you, guys.
No? Going once, twice? Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. Okay, up next, we have Emmanuel, who will take us to Puerto Rico and talking about coastal displacement and local seafood accessibility. And so Emmanuel is competing for the Student Achievement Prize, so please ask a lot of difficult questions. Thank you.
Don't worry. Thank you. As Eric mentioned, my name is Emmanuel Maldonado Gonzalez. I'm currently a student doing my master's in sociology in the University of Puerto Rico. This work is navigating the tide, coastal displacement, and local seafood accessibility in Culebra. It's just a little small part of my thesis. I did in collaboration with my colleague, Nicolas Gomez, which I know Eric knows because he was part of his thesis committee for the master's. And Natania Martinez is a facilitator that we have. This study looks into how displacement driven by tourism and unsustainable development impacts local fisheries, access to coast, and their ability to provide seafood for their own community. Our team believes that understanding and addressing those impacts is essential to creating a sustainable and equitable seafood system in the island of Culebra. Okay. Puerto Rico's small-scale fishery sector is a lifeline for its food security, culture, and economic opportunity, yet isn't an increasing vulnerable sector affected by hurricanes, economic shift, and the new nowadays is gentrification. Since many in Puerto Rico depend on food imports, up to 85% of the food brought from the US, local seafood could help fill that gap, but access barriers make that challenging. Our study focuses on Culebra as an example of how coastal displacement and gentrification are limiting those access to the traditional fishing communities. Culebra's fishing community has a unique cultural identity, often described as tied to the coast and practice of fishing. In 1975, local fishers took a bold stand against the US military, who was bombing and were damaging the local ecosystem, and won a victory that led to the creation of the Puerto Rico's first no-take marine protected area, also known as Reserva Natural Caño Luis Peña. This no-take area became an ecological success and increased fish diversity and biomass. Yet economic pressures in the following decades led to the closure of Culebra's fishing shop and a dwelling fishers association. Even with fewer commercial fishers today, the culture of fishing remains strong in Culebra. Many locals say we're all fishers, underlining their fishing as an essential part of Culebra's community identity. Deepwater snapper fisheries is one of the primary fisheries that is targeted here, including silk snapper and quid snapper. Those species are both economically valuable and sought after by restaurants, especially during peak tourism season in Culebra and Puerto Rico. Their high nutritional value, including omega-3 content, and makes them an essential food security, and essential food source, sorry. However, this fishery requires specialized gear, which is not very cheap, so it's very expensive for fishers to get it. It limits access for those with those resources. Additionally, due to coastal development and environmental change, fishers are being forced to fish farther out into deeper waters. And this shift could make deepwater snapper fishery a very good adaptation strategy, even though it's really expensive for them to do it, allowing fishers to diversify their catch and reducing also their pressure on the closer to shore fish stocks. Culebra has experienced 3 distinct waves of displacement. First wave occurred in the early 20th century due to military occupation by the US Navy, which forcibly relocated communities and restricted fishing grounds during that time. Second wave came in the 1990s, driven by tourism boom that brought vacations home into Culebra's shore, displacing locals and limiting their access to the coast. Now the third wave, it's Airbnb and short-term rentals. Are contributing to our rising property costs, pushing out residents, especially younger people who are unable to afford living there, with over 50% of vacant properties now becoming short-term rentals. Culebra's vacancy rate has risen to 68.5, much higher than the average in Puerto Rico. This shift doesn't just affect housing, it also affects Culebra's social and economic landscape, making it harder for fishers to access and benefit from the coast. Our findings highlight several key barriers to seafood access. Since Hurricane Maria, the numbers of illegal docks in Culebra has increased by 62%. We identified 162 docks in Ensenada Honda, in which only 25 of them led to local waters, to local land, leaving the rest primarily in hands of vacation homeowners and short-term rental operators. The privatization forces the fishers to rely on limited, often makeshift access points. Only few fishers have, about 3 only have had their private docks, so have that access to the water. This adds significant costs that can be a major deterrent to fishers trying to maintain their livelihoods. So you can see this is Ensenada Honda, and only the red ones are the ones that can be considered public land, even though none of the fishers tie their boats there, but if you tie it there at night, it's just going to disappear. And all of them are just private. All the other ones are private, and the yellow ones are between public and federal owned. I got lost for a second. Give me a second. And yeah, those access limits had a significant impact on social and economic effect. Like I said, only 3 fishers have access to private dock. Many rely on a network of shared docks owned by friends and family that gives them that direct access. This sharing illustrates the community's social resiliency, also highlights the importance of infrastructure that supports equitable access. Moreover, private docks are often used by recreational boaters who have typically higher income and are not dependent on fishing for their livelihoods. This creates an economic disparity where recreational users benefit from privatizing the coast, while fishers who rely on the sea for income are pushed out. And it shows how infrastructure doesn't account for local needs and can further marginalize traditional livelihoods. As you can see, that's the only bridge in Culebra where you can go and fight and fish. We don't have any other public places. Currently, we're in the process of reopening the fishery, but it's like really uphill. So it's the only small fish, the only place where locals can find fresh fish. And yeah, this is a picture from what we do or did the assessment, and this you can see the access that we happened. People are really interested in talking about this. If you talk about seafood access, if you talk about Airbnbs in Culebra, people are really interested because they know that's affecting their daily life, especially adding a factor as the ferry is really difficult to get access to Culebra, even though we have a public ferry, but I guess all the tickets go directly to the tourists and not to the residents. And now, illegal docks are led to severe environmental impacts, disturbing sensitive ecosystem. They damage seagrass beds, mangrove coral reefs, and of course, critical fish habitats. Mangrove are essential nursery for those habitats. A remote sensing analysis found that significant mangrove degradation in Sena La Honda between 2020 and 2022, because COVID lockdown, people wanted monitoring the coast, so all those illegal docks just appear magically. The decline is most pronounced near public docks, where an intense activity alters natural landscape. And of course, if left unaddressed, the degradation will continue to impact the fish population and threatening the future of Culebra fishing industry. And in conclusion, Culebra fishing community is struggling against coastal displacement, limited infrastructure, and environmental damage. Despite those challenges, there are ways forward. Our recommendations include investing in public docks and ramps that provide equal access, strengthening regular enforcement to curb illegal docks, and fostering community-led initiatives that empower fishers and encourage sustainable fishing practices. By focusing community-driven solutions and equal infrastructure, we can help ensure Culebra's fishing community thrives, preserving both its cultural heritage and its ecological integrity of its coastline. This approach will not only benefit Culebra, but only serve as a model for other coastal communities facing same problems all through the Caribbean. And thank you. This research was in part founded by NOAA and University of Maine, exploring in a bigger paper, exploring community-based fisheries and food systems all to the US territories.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So we have 20 minutes for questions for Emmanuel. No, we have time for a few questions.
Not my piece of defense.
We have time for a few questions for Emmanuel. Nancy. Yeah, there's a mic coming to you.
That was very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what your methodology was for, I mean, there was a lot of results and conclusions, but I didn't see any methods. So if you could just go over that briefly, that would be wonderful.
No, we just did rapid ethnographic assessment where we just survey locals about the problem, and just by that, just do informal interviews initially. Once you get a feel of how the community thinks and perceive the problems, then you develop a structured interview so you can develop the findings. And by the end, we wanted to verify that data, so we just developed a focus group around our findings, and we validate it with the community.
Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
Hey, great presentation. Thank you very much. I just wondered, why are the fishers targeting these deep water species? You mentioned that it was expensive gear for them to get?
Yes, it's expensive gear because it's more profitable, and it's one of the most consumed species in Puerto Rico. We also have lobsters, Caribbean lobsters, and queen conch, but queen snapper is the one more profitable, the one that tourists are pursuing more.
It's not because all of the more easily accessible snappers have been fished out? Is that
that's one of the, that could be one of the reasons, yeah.
So these deep water ones are just super tasty, or?
Yes, they're super tasty, and you can, Graciela can say that's what, queen snapper fisheries has a big market in Puerto Rico, and people tend to eat a lot of queen snapper. It's one of the most requested seafood.
And you'd be able to tell the difference then? You wouldn't be able to
Most of the people don't tell the difference, but it's targeted. That's it. If you put it in a plate, people most of the time don't tell the difference.
I can give you the answer. It's red. People
yeah, exactly.
like red fish.
Yes. People love white meat fish, and that's, yeah, before the color red's a big attract, something that really attracts people.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Oh, we have one more. Oh, we have a quick 30-second question.
Hi, Emmanuel. Good. That was an excellent presentation. My question is, I really liked how you interviewed the community, but I wonder if when looking at policies and like trying to implement policies that protect the community, do you think that maybe the more well-to-do would be able to more strongly influence the policies and essentially hinder change being affected to protect the habitats that you speak of and the communities that you spoke about?
That's our goal for this research, to empower more the community, because I didn't did this work just to get my master's degree. It's just to have document the evidence about this problem so the community can empower themselves and present it to the government so they can better the policies.
Okay, yeah. Great, thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next presenter is online. So Alessandra will talk to us about stakeholder initiative in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Good afternoon. My name is Alessandra Polo, founder of Blue Conscience, and today I'll be talking about the work that we and partners like Blue Marine Foundation and the Department of Marine Resources are undertaking to bring effective marine protection to St. Kitts and Nevis. First, a little bit of background on St. Kitts and Nevis. We are a very small two-island state of the Eastern Caribbean, covering a total area of only 270 kilometers squared and a total coastline of 135 kilometers. The population is over 48,000 people across both islands. St. Kitts and Nevis has a relatively small ocean shelf when compared to a much larger, extensive, exclusive economic zone. The islands are separated by a channel of 3 kilometers called the Narrows, of conservation importance, and the islands support a number of coastal and marine habitats, such as mangroves, salt ponds, coral reefs and seagrass beds, that provide food security and economic services to the local communities. In fact, the marine environment is also a significant draw for tourism, which is one of the largest economic sectors. Now, what we do? Blue Conscience is a recently funded NGO. We only registered in 2014, and we operate in St. Kitts and Nevis. Our organization was really born out of necessity, with the aim of bridging the gap between effective marine resource management, restoration of degraded habitats, and community involvement and participation. So to do this, we work on 3 main areas, which are marine conservation, marine science and research, marine education, and awareness. But of course, another important focus of our work is ensuring a transition to more sustainable fisheries. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis artisanal and commercial fisheries are an important source of income for many families. Fishers are mainly equipped with small vessels with single engine, and only a very few larger vessels operate offshore fishing. The main methods used are pot traps, long lines, designs, the use of fads, and spearfishing. And the main fisheries on islands are lobster, conch, demersal reef, and pelagic. Now, the local government entity, the Department of Marine Resources, is in charge of fisheries management as well as the management of the marine habitat. There are some rules in place and at the moment, and these regard mostly size restrictions for example, lobsters and conchs, though there is no closed season for either. And there are also regulations on fishing gear, such as spear guns being allowed only upon permission, and also restrictions on mesh sizes. But despite these regulations, fisheries in St. Kitts and Nevis face a very high risk due to different factors. This has been clearly highlighted in recent reports conducted by Canary and FAO. In fact, fisheries are being negatively impacted by unsustainable fishing practices, lack of effective management and enforcement, habitat loss and degradation, last but not least, climate change in terms of intensified hurricanes activity and sea level rise. So of course, you may imagine that not only fisheries are at risk, but vital marine habitats like coral reefs over the last decades have suffered major loss and degradation, both due to climate change, resulting in the rise of sea temperatures, but also local anthropogenic stressors. Importantly, sedimentation and erosion from coastal development, land-based sources of pollution like nitrification, and overfishing. In fact, fishing pressure has increased in the last years, also given a higher demand in local fish and seafood in St. Kitts. And the same reports have actually stated how the amount of fish caught has increased of more than 5 times only between 2013 and 2018. With SKN facing degraded habitats and depleted fish stocks, it is well clear how there is an urgent need for marine protection. So what you see here on this slide is a map of what's called the St. Kitts and Nevis Marine Managed Area Plan. But of course we have to also add a little bit of history on this, because the first efforts date back to more than 15 years ago, where accurate marine spatial information and use of coastal waters was acquired during a workshop in 2009 led by the TNC. And in 2016, a reef assessment was conducted in order to further inform on which areas needed higher conservation priority, also led by the TNC. That same year, the SKN MMA was declared, but since then it has not been ratified nor implemented. Currently, basically the MMA is based on data from 2009-2016. It stretches for 2 nautical miles around both islands, and it designates areas to different uses, such as conservation in green, fisheries in blue, transportation in brown, and also a series of mixed uses. So it stands out how we need to get to the bottom of why the plan has been withheld and need more recent information on the use and extent of coastal fisheries to inform better policy decisions and make the plan sustainable for the different sectors involved, such as diving operators, water sports, tourism. So this is where Blue Conscience decided to reach out to Blue Marine Foundation to help bring effective marine protection to St. Kitts and push for the implementation of the plan by supporting the local government in this prioritization. So together we conducted a scoping trip last March where we talked to as many stakeholders as possible and interviewed fishermen from their different communities across St. Kitts and Nevis. We sat down with DMR then and together we defined short-term, mid-term and more long-term goals. So in terms of short-term goals, we want to conduct updated fishermen surveys on the perception of the SKNMA and marine protection. And another very important aim, which was raised during these meetings, was the implementation of an awareness campaign on the effects of unsustainable fishing and importance of complying to these regulations in place. In terms of midterm goals, we want to conduct public consultations to all stakeholders to include an additional network of 10 smaller no-take, no-anchoring zones. And when looking at more of a long-term aim, part of the project is to actually establish a large-scale area to protect 30% of the offshore exclusive economic zone, especially given the fact that it is not being exploited due to the lack of infrastructure and larger vessels. So I'm happy to say that this October we finally started with conducting the fishermen's surveys across 14 different communities, which you can see here represented as black triangles on the map. And these will last until end of the year, and they're led by the DMR. And here are some of the questions we asked regarding the SKNMMA and marine conservation. So here today we can actually share with you the first preliminary data. So to the question, do you see the need for marine protection? 75% of the fishermen replied yes. And to were you involved in the last SKNMMA plan? 88% of them replied no. Do you support the SKNMMA? Majority of the fishermen replied yes. And is there a need for no-catch zones? Again, majority replied yes. So it stands out that majority of fishermen were not involved in the previous plan, which could be the possible reason for why the plan did not take off until now. But most do realize the need for marine protection, especially the ones that have reported to spend more time, deploy more gear, and go further out to meet their catch demand. So of course we will continue to work on this project for the next upcoming year. So with this, I want to acknowledge Blue Marine Foundation for embarking with us on this project and always assisting with great advice. I also want to thank Department of Marine Resources for their support, open discussions and collaboration. And since we are a very small NGO with a big mission ahead, we would love to get to know more regarding similar projects in the Caribbean and how we can overcome similar challenges. So you can reach out to me through these links, and I'm here for any questions.
Is she on the line, Fadila? Oh, perfect. So are there any questions? Oh, we have a question.
Hi, Alessandra. I just wanted to know, how has you say you work with the Department of Marine Resources, has there been any other support from any other ministerial bodies in St. Kitts? I asked because last week I presented at the COP Youth Forum, or maybe like 2 weeks ago, and it was really well received, and I just wanted to know, what's the status with regards to the St. Kitts government, because they seem very intent on, putting forward initiatives that help to promote their environmental resources.
So yes, Blue Conscience deals mostly with the, I just hear myself, with the Department of Marine Resources, which is below the Ministry of Fisheries and Agriculture, but we have not actually been engaging so far with other ministries. We know that there's also the Department of Environment, very active at the moment on a lot of more other environmental actions.
We lost volume there.
Alessandra, can you pause 1 second? We're not hearing you very well. Can you just check your mic? Can you check one more time? It's open. Are you hearing us, Alessandra? We're still not hearing.
That's just me. Sorry.
Can you unmute and try again? We can hear you.
You know what we can do? You can just, restart it. Tell her we're just cutting the...
Can you unmute and try speaking?
No, but you can call her back.
Okay.
We're trying to call you back, yeah?
Well, this is awkward.
No, I did that.
She's coming back? Question mark? But in the meantime, I'll give some announcements. So, the first one, Martin is still looking for his bag. If you see it, please contact him. It contains Australian information. The second announcement, our guest speaker would like all the women to congregate by the silent auction area for a group picture with her. So after the session, if you would like to be in that picture, if you could please congregate close to the silent auction for a selfie. The third announcement, coffee break everyone will come back at 3:45 for Fisher's Forum, where we will unveil our new Gladden Memorial winner and have what promises to be an amazing performance by a group of women from Barbados. So you don't want to miss it. So come back at 3:45. You need to be back here at 3:45 exactly. If you're back at 3:46, you missed the performance. So you need to be back here at 3:45. She's back. Thank you very much for coming to my show.
Please, from 1 to 1,000. Let's go. Let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay. Do you remember the question?
I did not hear I did not hear any questions after the first question.
Okay. Could you finish your thought on the first question then? We missed the last part of your answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. So in regards to what the government of St. Kitts and how active it is at the moment in terms of these initiatives, we work with the Department of Marine Resources, which is under the Ministry of Fisheries and Agriculture. And then there is another department called the Department of Environment, which is under another ministry. They're also quite active at the moment with sustainable solutions, climate change solutions, but they do not manage the marine habitat. So there's a kind of a red line between where the Department of Marine Resources is in charge, and the Department of Environment will manage more the actual coastline and land.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions for us? Oh, we have one more for you.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask specifically regarding the fishers. How do you know that there's not like a generational change now, and maybe the ones that did participate before are just, retired or whatever? Because we have seen at Seaflower that there was a generational change with the ones that helped establish the MPA or the fishing zones or not take areas with regards to the ones that are working now. It's like a generational difference specifically.
That's a very good question. We do actually look at also the age in the surveys, and we do deal, of course, with just looking at the age. We do deal also with older fishermen. I've spoken to them myself, and yes, those would be the ones that were involved with the SKN MMA plan. So they remember about talks, about workshops, about a lot of talking actually taking place, but little action. So yes, they would be the ones that would have replied that they have been involved, but the younger ones most of them have really never heard of what the plan is about. So there's also a lot of, that's why we need to redo a whole set of public consultations with the new generation of fishermen to inform them.
Okay, thank you very much, Alessandra. We appreciate it. So again, thank you all so much to our presenters. This was a governance session. We heard quite a bit of interesting information. Please see them at the coffee break. Again, you're coming back here at 3:45, and we will hear directly from our fishers. We've been talking about them a lot this morning, so please come back at 3:45 to hear directly from our fishers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandra.